4 years into my marriage with Damon Ashford, I suddenly developed the ability to see the ranking in everyone's heart. In my mother's heart, I was number 1. In my best friend's heart, I was number 2, right behind her own mate. Even the bonded barista at the corner shop had his husband locked at number 1, unmoving, the way it should be. I couldn't wait to check Damon's. Number 1, his mother. Number 2, Kian Ashford. That was me. I was number 2. I smiled the whole day. And Alpha's heart is supposed to be loud and territorial. Damon had always been proud, almost showy, about how he ranked me above his own pack. Number 2, right under his mother, felt like exactly where a devoted mate should sit. Until I saw number 6, Reed, a name I'd never heard him say once in 4 years. I told myself it didn't matter. I was second, he was only 6th. A beta, unranked in any pack, unbonded, unthreatening. I'd been raised to believe betas didn't even register on an alpha's radar the way another alpha might. But over the next few days, the name crept upward, slowly, unhurried, the way something moves when it already knows it's going to win. That night, Damon came home and pulled me into his chest the way he always did, one hand pressed flat over my bonding gland like he was checking it was still warm. "Missed you," he said. I looked at the ranking hovering silently above his head. Reed had climbed to number 4. "Damon, who's Reed?" The hand on my neck went still, just for a moment, long enough that I felt it in my own scent gland before I felt it anywhere else. That stillness was so brief I could have imagined it. Damon looked down at me, easy and unbothered. "New Omega Relations Liaison on my floor. Beta, so he doesn't trigger half the nonsense the other reps do around ruts. I've been showing him how the department runs." He ruffled my hair, same as always.
"What, you're not jealous of a beta, are you?" I looked up at him and smiled, like the question was ridiculous. Above his head, Reed's name held steady at number 4. Didn't waver, didn't so much as flicker. If he were only a coworker, there should have been something, a flare of amusement, irritation, anything. An alpha's heart isn't quiet. Mine wasn't when someone questioned Damon. There was nothing, just a name sitting exactly where it wanted to sit. I said no and drank my tea instead of looking at him. The next morning, he left for work 18 minutes earlier than he had every day for the past 4 years. Said the packed transit lines were backed up near his building. He still made me breakfast before he left. Soft eggs, the crusts cut off my toast, the way he'd done since our bonding. I watched his car disappear around the corner, then opened the pack tracker app we'd both installed after his last territorial dispute, back when he still wanted me to know exactly where he was so I'd never worry. His car didn't go toward the office. It stopped in a residential district I didn't recognize. 11 minutes, then it moved again. I stared at the little dot until my tea got cold. Second day, same time, same stop. By the 4th day, I stopped waving from the window. I just watched the dot leave, watched it pause, watched it start moving again like nothing about it deserved my attention. Every morning, Reed's name inched a little closer. Not by much, just enough that I couldn't stop checking. That week, I found his phone charging on the kitchen counter, screen lit with a notification he hadn't caught in time. Not a message, a calendar reminder. The kind he used to set for my birthday and our bonding anniversary, the only 2 dates he'd ever bothered to program in. Reed, opening night, don't forget flowers. 4 years of marriage, and I couldn't remember him buying me flowers that weren't an apology for something. He'd never once set a reminder to make sure he didn't forget me on an ordinary Tuesday. I put the phone back down before the screen dimmed on its own. I didn't say anything that night either. I was starting to understand that silence had become its own kind of evidence. The longer I said nothing, the more he assumed nothing needed to be said, and the more he let slip in the space he thought I wasn't watching. That evening, Damon stood at the counter fussing with the pour-over kettle we never used, a wedding gift we kept because it looked nice, not because either of us drank anything but plain black coffee bonded to caffeine and nothing else. A sweet, foreign smell filled the kitchen. Caramel. Cream. It didn't smell like us.
He brought a cup over and set it down in front of me, and there was something careful in the way he watched my face, like he was bracing for a reaction he didn't want. "Try it." I did. Sweet, soft, nothing like anything either of us had ever ordered in 4 years of Sunday mornings. "Since when do you like caramel?" A half-second pause, then a smile. Felt like trying something new. That half-second sat behind my eyes for the rest of the night. He showered later, phone left face up on the couch. I only glanced at it. I want that on record. I only glanced. And the Notes app was still open. Caramel to milk, 3 to 7. He said a little sweeter. He. Not a name, just a pronoun deliberately unspecific, the kind you only bother with if you're already imagining someone reading over your shoulder. I set the phone back exactly where it had been. Later, curled against him on the couch, I felt his phone buzz against the cushion. He glanced at it, and something in his face went soft in a way I hadn't put there. 5 seconds, that was all it took. In those 5 seconds, Reed's name jumped forward and settled directly behind mine. I had my ear against his chest. I felt his heartbeat pick up, quick and warm. Not for me. He set the phone down and pulled me in closer instead, tucking my head under his chin, one hand smoothing down my spine the way you'd calm something you were afraid might bolt. Like he was making up for something or covering for it. That night, I lay awake long after his breathing had gone slow and even. Streetlight cut a thin line across his face. He looked peaceful, content even, the way an alpha looks when every part of his life is exactly where he wants it. I used to love watching him sleep. That night, I made myself look up instead at the ranking hanging patient and silent above him. Number 1, his mother. Number 2, Kian Ashford. Number 2, Reed. Tied. 4 years of marriage and a beta I hadn't known existed a month ago weighed exactly the same in his heart as I did. I moved his arm off my waist, turned to face the wall, and didn't close my eyes again before morning. The following week, I stopped waiting for more evidence to fall into my lap and started looking for it properly. I went back through every photo Damon had ever been tagged in, scrolling months deep, looking for anything I'd scrolled past without seeing it for what it was. Most of it was nothing. Conference panels, team lunches, the ordinary noise of a life I'd trusted without checking. But 3 weeks back, buried in a company post about a client dinner, there it was. Damon at the edge of the frame, half-cropped, unaware, and behind him on the wall a black and white print with a small placard just barely in focus. A gallery name, a street I recognized once I looked closely enough. It took one more search from there to find out whose name was on that print. I told myself I was going to see the evidence, that's all. I wasn't going to see him. I saw him anyway. He was on the far side of the room in a plain charcoal sweater talking quietly with an older couple about one of his pieces. No performance in it, no awareness of being watched, which somehow made it worse. He had the kind of face that didn't need to try. Sharp where Damon was soft, tall in that unhurried beta way that never postured for a room the way alphas did. Dark hair falling slightly over one eye when he tilted his head to listen. I understood, standing there, why an alpha's heart might move for him without permission. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a threat announcing itself with scent or posture. It was just quiet and whole and entirely unbothered by needing to be anything else. I hated how long I looked. His prints were good, genuinely good. The waterfront series near the old university caught the light in a way that made my chest hurt before I even let myself think about why. I already knew why. I recognized the railing in the 3rd frame. I recognized the bridge in the 4th. Damon had taken him there. Of course he had. I made it halfway through the room before the placard under 5th photo blurred and wouldn't come back into focus. I turned, walked fast, found the corridor with the restrooms, and locked myself in a stall before anything on my face could give me away in public. I didn't sob. Omegas raised the way I was raised don't sob where anyone can hear it. I just sat on the closed lid with my hand pressed hard over my mouth and shook, silently, for what felt like a long time. I didn't hear the door open. I heard the knock instead. Soft, 2 knuckles, from someone who'd clearly heard something even through a locked door and a running vent fan. "You've been in there 15 minutes, a voice said. Low, even. Alpha, unmistakably, but nothing like Damon's, no weight thrown into it, no expectation that the door should open just because he'd spoken. "I'm not going to ask if you're okay, because you're obviously not. I'll just say the door's unlocked whenever you want it to be, and nobody out here is paying attention to anything but the wine." I hadn't planned on answering. I answered anyway, my voice wrecked in a way I hated. "I'm fine." "Sure?" A pause. Not the sound of him leaving. "I'll be right here regardless." He didn't push. He didn't ask for a name, didn't try the handle, didn't do any of the things I'd have expected from an alpha who'd stumbled onto a strange omega falling apart in a gallery bathroom. He just stayed. Close enough that I could hear him breathing evenly on the other side of the door, patient in a way that felt less like waiting and more like standing guard. When I finally came out, eyes raw, I found him leaning against the wall across from the door, arms crossed, dark suit, the kind of stillness that alphas usually can't manage in a room full of strangers. He didn't look at me like I was a mess to be handled. He looked at me like I was someone's bad night he'd simply decided to make less bad. "Sebastian," he said, offering nothing else, not his last name, not a card, not a single question about why. "Kian," I said, before I'd decided to. He studied me for a moment, not the way Damon looked at a room, cataloging what could be useful in it, but like he was actually looking and didn't need anything from what he saw. "For what it's worth," he said, glancing once toward the gallery floor, toward the waterfront prints still hanging under soft white light. "Whoever did that to you is an idiot. I've been in that room 15 minutes, and even I could tell those photographs weren't taken for the person standing next to him tonight." I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't ask anything. I just stood there, in a hallway that smelled like gallery wine and cold air from the propped fire door, and let a rival alpha I'd never met see me exactly as broken as I actually was. Because for the first time in weeks, nobody's ranking above his head had lied to me even once. I should have gone home after the gallery. Instead, I let Sebastian buy me coffee from a cart outside. Black, no caramel, no questions about why that mattered to me. And we sat on a bench along the same waterfront Reed had photographed, because apparently there was nowhere in this city that didn't already belong to somebody else's memory of Damon. I hadn't meant to look at his ranking. I'd been trying not to ever since the bathroom door, because I already knew what looking at strangers' hearts had cost me the last few weeks. But he turned to hand me the cup, and it was just there, hanging quiet and patient above him, the way it always did, whether I wanted it to or not. Number 1, his younger sister. Number 2, a name I didn't recognize, Marcus. An old friend, steady and unmoving, the kind of ranking that only comes from years, not weeks. Number 3, his mother. And then, lower down, sitting at a number that hadn't budged since the moment I'd sat beside him, number 7. Kian Ashford. Not climbing, not chasing anything, just present. The way a person shows up on someone's ranking after one conversation when there's nothing false propping it up yet, nothing borrowed from somebody else's memory. It was such a small number, it shouldn't have meant anything. It was the first honest number I'd seen in a month. "You keep doing that," Sebastian said, watching me over the rim of his own cup, "looking somewhere just past my shoulder like you're reading something I can't see." I didn't answer that directly. Instead, I asked the question I'd been circling since the bathroom door. "How do you know Damon?" Something in his jaw tightened, just barely, the first flicker of anything sharp I'd seen him all night. "Ashford Consolidated," he said. "We've been competing for the same accounts for 6 years, same conferences, same boards, same rooms. He usually wins the room, I usually win the account." A short, humorless breath. "It's a small industry." "So you know him." "I know of him." Sebastian's eyes went distant for a moment. Somewhere back in a memory he didn't seem eager to hand over whole. "I met his mate exactly once at a gala 3 years ago. Damon barely introduced you. I remember that more than I remember you, honestly, which says everything about how he was running that room. He talked about margins the entire night and left you standing by the bar for 40 minutes. I remembered that gala. I remembered the bar and the ache in my feet and telling myself Damon was just busy, just important, just an alpha who needed a lot of people. "You remember that?" I said slowly. "And not me?" "I remember you were the only person in that ballroom he wasn't paying attention to." Sebastian's voice didn't soften when he said it. If anything, it went flatter, more careful, like he was handling something he didn't want to say wrong. "I've spent 6 years losing to a man who doesn't even know what he has, and I'm not interested in winning something by being cruel to the person he already hurt. If I ever want to beat Damon Ashford at something that actually matters, it isn't going to be by taking what's his." He looked at me directly then, steady, no performance in it at all. "It's going to be by being the kind of alpha who'd never have let it get this far in the first place." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to check his ranking again to know it hadn't moved. For the first time in a month, I let myself sit somewhere that felt honest, even if it was on a stranger's bench, even if the stranger was the last man on earth I should have let see me like this. Damon was on the couch when I got home, jacket still on, tie loosened, a half-empty glass sweating on the side table. He looked up the second the door clicked shut, and something in his face went carefully blank in the way it always did when he was recalibrating. "You're back late," he said. Not a question, an opening, testing how much I'd give him unprompted. Gallery opening ran long. That much, at least, was true. He studied me for a beat too long, checking my scent, probably, the way alphas do when something feels off but they can't name it yet. I'd showered off Sebastian's cologne before I left the bench out of habit more than strategy, but I hadn't thought to scrub away whatever else clung to me. The calm, the bit of steadiness I hadn't had in weeks. "You smell different," he said, finally. Careful, almost accusing. I almost laughed. 4 weeks of caramel and unfamiliar apartment complexes and a beta's name climbing steadily toward mine, and the first time I came home smelling like something new, he noticed inside of 30 seconds. "Do I?" I said, and walked past him to the kitchen instead of answering. He followed. Of course he followed. Guilt makes an alpha attentive in exactly the ways affection used to. "Kian?" His voice softened into the register he used when he wanted something smoothed over quickly. "Is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." I looked at the ranking above his head before I answered. Reed locked at number 1. His mother pushed 2, me 3rd, and sinking. 4 years and I'd been demoted in my own marriage without a single conversation about it. "I'm fine," I said, the same lie he'd been feeding me for a month, handed right back to him. He didn't push. Damon never pushed once a surface answer let him stop looking. That was the thing about him I'd mistaken for trust for 4 years. It wasn't trust. It was relief at not having to look closer. He kissed my temple on his way to the bedroom, murmured something about an early morning, and left me alone in the kitchen with the tap running and no intention of drinking anything. I didn't cry that night. I was done with that particular use of my energy. Instead, I sat at the table long after the apartment went quiet and made myself write down, plainly, everything I actually knew. The coffee, the pen, the waterfront, the receipt. Reed's name and how long it had taken to climb. Every excuse Damon had handed me laid out next to the truth it had been covering. And under all of it, one more name. Sebastian Cole, number 7, unmoving, honest. I thought about what he'd said on the bench, that he wasn't interested in taking what was Damon's, that if he ever beat him at something real, it would be by being the kind of alpha who'd never let this happen in the first place. I didn't want revenge built on being wanted by someone else. I'd had 4 years of being wanted conditionally, ranked and re-ranked against whoever was newest, and I was finished building anything else on those terms. But I understood, sitting there, that there was a difference between using Sebastian and choosing him, and that the second one was actually available to me, if I was willing to walk away from a marriage that had already ended in every way except paperwork. Damon didn't get to keep pretending this was a temporary lapse he'd compensate his way out of with an island trip and 3 days of guilty attentiveness.
I'd watched him do exactly that kind of math for a month. I wasn't interested in being the debt he settled when it was convenient. The next morning, before he left for work, 18 minutes early, same as always, same red dot pausing at the same address, I made a call of my own. Not to a lawyer, not yet. To Sebastian. He picked up on the second ring, like he'd been half expecting it. "Kian? I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "And I need you to actually think about the answer before you give it to me, not just say what you think I want to hear." "I'm listening." I looked at the empty side of the counter where Damon usually left his mug. Already gone. Already 20 minutes into a route that led somewhere that wasn't the office. If I end it with Damon, properly, publicly, in a way he can't spin, would you be willing to be seen with me? Not pretend, not revenge theater. I mean, actually consider whether there's something real enough between us to build once I'm not someone else's third place anymore. There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation. I could tell the difference now after a month of learning to read the space between what people said and what they meant. "I told you on that bench I wasn't interested in taking what's his," Sebastian said finally, quiet and certain. "But you were never his to take, Kian. You're allowed to decide you're done being ranked by a man who couldn't even do the math correctly. And when you are, yes, I'd be willing, more than willing." I closed my eyes and let that sit in my chest for a moment, steady in a way nothing had been in weeks. "Then I need a few days," I said. "I want to end this the right way. I want him to understand exactly what he threw away, and I want him to watch me choose someone better instead of just leaving quietly. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." I hung up, and for the first time in a month, when I looked at my own hands, they weren't shaking. I planned it the way Damon had taught me to plan things, without meaning to. Find the moment your opponent is least prepared and don't give them room to spin it. Reed had a second showing that week, a smaller one, just a handful of new prints added to the same gallery. I knew because I'd kept checking, the way you check a wound to see if it's still bleeding. I also knew from the tracker I hadn't deleted yet that Damon's car would be parked 2 blocks away at exactly 6 that evening, same as every other time he'd told me he was working late. I got there first. Reed was adjusting a frame near the entrance when I walked in, and up close, in better light, he was exactly as unbearably composed as he'd been the first time. Dark eyes, unhurried hands, nothing performative in the way he held himself. He glanced at me, polite, professional, the way you'd look at any stranger at your own opening. "I love this series," I said, stopping in front of the waterfront prints. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "The railing one especially. Someone very special must have shown you that spot." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt, not yet, just the faint uncertainty of a person realizing a stranger knows more than a stranger should. "He did," Reed said carefully. "My boyfriend. He's actually meeting me here tonight if you want to tell him yourself how much you liked it." Boyfriend. I'd known for a month, and it still landed like something physical, hearing it said out loud, easy and unguarded from someone who had absolutely no idea what he was actually saying. "I'd love to. Tell him yourself, I mean, when he gets here." Reed's brow creased slightly, reading something in my tone he couldn't place yet, but before he could ask, the door chimed behind us. Damon walked in carrying 2 cups. Caramel, I didn't need to guess, his eyes already soft and searching the room for Reed the way they hadn't searched for me in longer than I wanted to admit. Then his gaze slid 1 step further and found me instead. I watched every part of him stop at once, the easy smile, the forward motion, the hand steady around the cups until it wasn't, until both lids popped and caramel milk splashed across the gallery's pale floor in a spreading, sweet-smelling stain that every head in the room turned toward. "Kian!" My name came out of him like something that had been knocked loose. Reed looked between us, confusion sharpening into something worse as the pieces started arranging themselves behind his eyes. "You too? You know each other?" "He's my mate," I said,
calm, clear, pitched exactly loud enough for the small crowd near the entrance to catch it without me having to raise my voice at all. 4 years bonded. I'm sure he mentioned that at some point, in between telling you how special that waterfront spot was. Reed went white. He looked at Damon, waiting, visibly, desperately for a denial that didn't come, because Damon was still standing frozen in a puddle of his own cowardice with nothing prepared for a moment he'd clearly never planned for.
"Damon," Reed said, low, urgent, tell him that's not—" "It's fine," I cut in, gentle, almost kind, which seemed to unsettle Damon more than any amount of anger would have. "You didn't do anything to me. You didn't even know I existed in any version of his life that mattered. That's not on you." I looked at Damon then, at the ranking still hanging patient and unbothered above his head, exactly where it had been for a month. Number 1, Reed. Number 2, his mother. Number 3, me. Even now, mid-collapse, watching his carefully built double life come apart in front of a room of strangers, even now, I still hadn't moved back to first. "Kian, let me explain," Damon started, stepping forward, reaching for me the way he always did when he needed a problem to resolve quickly and quietly. I stepped back before his hand landed. "I don't need to explain the coffee, or the pen, or the receipt from that shop at 7:48 a.m. that morning, or the 11 minutes your car sat outside an apartment that isn't the office, 4 mornings a week for a month." I watched something in his face give way with every item, watched Reed's hand come up to cover his mouth beside him. I did the math myself. I'm very good at it, it turns out. I had a good teacher. The gallery had gone quiet around us, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, though we both knew I already had, precisely and deliberately. "I'm here because I wanted you to understand something before the papers get filed. You didn't lose me because someone better came along and took me. You lost me because you spent 4 years deciding, one small choice at a time, that I wasn't worth keeping." I glanced once, briefly, at Reed, whose eyes were bright with a hurt that had nothing to do with me. "And I think you're about to lose him the same way, once he understands what you actually are." I turned to leave. Damon caught my wrist, not hard, just desperate, the way you grab at something already falling. "Let go of him!" The voice came from the entrance, even and unhurried, and I didn't need to turn around to know it. Sebastian crossed the room in a few unbothered strides, and the temperature of the whole space seemed to shift with him. Not aggressive, not posturing the way Damon would have if their positions were reversed, just entirely, immovably certain. Damon's hand dropped from my wrist on its own. "Cole," Damon's voice had gone tight, the particular tightness of an alpha realizing he's just been outmaneuvered in front of an audience by the one rival he'd never taken seriously enough to. "This isn't your business," Sebastian said, calm, almost bored, like the memory cost him nothing at all to produce. "It became my business the moment you left him standing alone at a bar for 40 minutes 3 years ago, and it stayed my business every day since that. You were too busy optimizing accounts to notice what you actually had." He looked at me, and something in his face gentled completely, all the flatness gone. "Ready?" I looked once more at Damon, really looked, the way I hadn't let myself in weeks, and felt nothing rise up to stop me. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." We left him standing in a puddle of cooling caramel, Reed beside him with his arms wrapped tight around himself, the gallery lights bright and unkind on both of them. I didn't look back to check whose ranking was moving anymore. I already knew mine had. I heard, later, what Damon did after we left, not from him, but from a mutual acquaintance who still thought it was gossip worth passing along instead of a warning. He'd stood in that gallery for a long time after the room emptied out, staring at the stain on the floor like it might tell him something the rest of the night hadn't. He hadn't gone after either of us. He'd gone home, alone, to an apartment that would only ever hold whatever ranking he'd earned for himself from that point forward. No mother to soften it, no beta to distract from it, nobody left standing close enough to check. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I didn't feel much of anything at all, which was its own kind of answer.
The papers were finalized on a gray Tuesday, unremarkable in every way except for how light I felt walking out of the office afterward. No scene, no last word from Damon, who'd apparently decided somewhere in the last month that silence was easier than facing what he'd actually done. Reed, I heard through people who still talked to me out of old habit, had ended things with him the same night at the gallery and hadn't spoken to him since. I ran into Reed once, months later, at a different gallery across town. His own name on the wall this time, no placard borrowed from anyone else's memory. He recognized me and had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly a second before he crossed the room anyway. "I didn't know," he said. Just that. No excuses built around it. "I know you didn't," I told him, and meant it. "I hope the next person you photograph a waterfront for actually deserves it." He almost smiled at that, the kind of small, rueful thing that told me he'd already learned the lesson the hard way. We didn't talk long after that. There wasn't much left to say between two people whose only real connection had been a man neither of us should have trusted. I hoped, genuinely, that he found someone whose ranking told the truth. Sebastian was waiting outside when I came out, leaning against his car in the thin autumn light, hands in his pockets, watching the door like he'd been there longer than he needed to admit. Before I reached him, my phone buzzed. My mother, checking in the way she'd started doing every week since I'd told her about the divorce, careful never to push for more than I offered. I answered right there on the courthouse steps. "It's done," I told her. "How do you feel?" It was the same question Sebastian would ask me 30 seconds later, and it struck me that the two people who'd never once needed to check my ranking to know where they stood with me were also the only two who ever bothered asking how I actually felt, instead of assuming. "Free," I said, "and I think I'm happy. It's been a while since I recognized the feeling." She was quiet for a second, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she finally spoke. "You are always number one to me, sweetheart. I'm glad you finally found someone who understands that's not supposed to be complicated." I told her I loved her, hung up, and slid the phone back into my pocket, something settling in my chest that felt suspiciously like peace. The 6 months between that gallery and this office hadn't been a straight line to here. There had been slow dinners where I flinched at nothing, apologized for it, and he'd just refilled my water and waited for me to keep talking whenever I was ready. There'd been a night I panicked halfway through opening up to him about the tracker app and the receipts, certain I sounded unhinged saying it all out loud, and he'd just listened to every word without once making me feel foolish for having noticed. He never rushed the trust. He built toward it the same unhurried way he'd waited outside that bathroom door. Present, patient, never once demanding I hand it over before I meant it. "How do you feel?" he asked, no performance in it, the way he asked everything. "Lighter," I said, and meant it completely. He didn't reach for me right away. That was still one of the things I loved most about him. 6 months into whatever this had slowly, carefully become, he never assumed I wanted to be touched just because he wanted to touch me. He waited for me to close the distance myself. Every time, like my choosing it mattered more to him than the touch itself. So I did. I stepped into him, rested my forehead against his collarbone, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the morning I first saw Reed's name climbing. His arms came around me slowly, one hand settling warm at the small of my back, the other coming up to smooth over my hair. He smelled of cedar and clean cold air. Nothing borrowed from anyone else's coffee order. "For what it's worth," he murmured against the top of my head, "I checked something the other day. Since you're not the only one who can read a heart when it matters." I pulled back enough to look up at him. "Checked what?" "Whether I still felt the same as I did on that bench." His thumb traced along my jaw, unhurried, like we had every minute in the world and he intended to use all of them. "I do. More, actually. It's a strange thing watching someone put themselves back together and realizing you'd like to spend the rest of your life just being allowed to watch." My chest ached in the good way, the way it hadn't in longer than I could remember. "You're allowed," I said quietly, "if you want to be." "I want to be," he said it, plainly, no hesitation in it at all, the same steady certainty he'd offered me from the very first night outside a bathroom door. "I'm not interested in being ranked against anyone else, Kian. I just want to be someone you never have to check the ranking for." I'd like it to just be obvious. Every day. I felt my eyes sting, but it was nothing like the nights I'd spent crying silently into a pillow so Damon wouldn't hear. This was something else entirely. Something warm. Something earned. It already is, I told him. You've been steady since the first night. I never had to look twice. He smiled then, the real one, the one that reached all the way to his eyes and softened every sharp line of his face, and leaned down slowly, giving me every chance to step back if I wanted to. I didn't want to. His lips met mine, soft, unhurried, one hand cradling the side of my face like I was something worth being careful with. It wasn't desperate the way I'd half expected romance to feel after everything. It was quiet, patient, the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything to anyone watching because there was nothing left to prove. Just two people who'd finally stopped ranking each other against the wreckage of someone else's mistakes. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead resting against mine, both of us smiling in that helpless, unguarded way you only manage when you've stopped bracing for something to go wrong. "So," he said softly, "dinner tonight? Somewhere that's ours, not a single memory borrowed from anyone else." "Somewhere new," I agreed. "I'd like that." He took my hand, laced our fingers together, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel the need to look up and check where I stood. I already knew. I was exactly where I wanted to be. Chosen, steady, and finally, completely first.
The end.